Lecture, I'll address the questions: what is the gender division of labor? And what is the economy? And how does it inform the work we do? In the Men and Masculinities module, I talked about how patriarchy originated at the end of the Pleistocene era, around 11,000 years ago. That's when the archaeological record first shows evidence of social stratification along gender lines, with men on top of the social hierarchy in dominant positions and women on the bottom in subordinate positions. Patriarchy emerged alongside the development of agriculture and the domestication of animals. Human beings haven't always had agriculture. As a species, humans spent 90% of our time on this planet as hunter gatherers. In hunter gatherer societies, people obtained food by hunting, fishing, scavenging, and gathering wild plants and other edibles. Hunter gatherer societies are typically characterized by gender equality. Men and women might organize themselves around gender specific roles, but gender doesn't determine higher or lower rank in society, nor does it affect access to power and resources. As human societies developed agriculture, many shifted away from a more nomadic way of life that revolved around hunting and gathering and toward a settled way of life, which allowed for more prolonged contact among people. The shift from a hunter gatherer economy to an agricultural economy corresponds with a shift in gender relationships. The word economy refers to how people organize themselves to produce and distribute resources. Resources refer to things we value, such as food, clothing, shelter, and technology. How we make these things, who gets these things, why they get these things, and how they get these things are functions of the economy and how it's organized. Although hunter gatherers practiced gender equality, they recognized gender differences and tended to organize labor along gendered lines. Agricultural societies continued and further developed the gender division of labor. The gender division of labor refers to the allocation of different jobs or types of work to women and men. The gender division of labor reinforces the gender binary and often places people who don't conform to the gender binary in precarious economic positions. The agricultural revolution 11,000 years ago gave birth to not only patriarchy, but civilization as well. Civilization refers to an advanced and complex stage of human social and cultural organization. As civilization spread across the globe, so did patriarchy and the gender division of labor. Increasingly, men came to dominate the public sphere, the domain of war, politics, paid work, commerce, and law. Women, on the other hand, were relegated to the private sphere of the household. Agricultural economies flourished around the world for millennia, though the question of land ownership didn't arise until the late Middle Ages in Western Europe. At the time, European economies operated according to the system of feudalism. Under feudalism, the monarch, that is, the king or queen, controls all the land and allocates it to inferiors like lords and barons in exchange for military protection. At the bottom of the feudal hierarchy are peasants, agricultural laborers legally bound to the land they work. As the feudal system evolved, lords and barons became more independent and empowered. They began to press for the right to private property to prevent monarchs from taking or having access to what they were coming to see as their land. Private property refers to the exclusive ownership of land or other resources. In the 16th and 17th centuries, private property emerged as a dominant organizing principle in societies across Europe as capitalism began to replace feudalism. During this period, Europeans started colonizing other parts of the globe, including the Americas, and took with them the idea that land and resources should be owned by individuals or groups of individuals for their own private gain. In 1776, American colonists
I appreciate you. Thank you.
declared independence from England, in part because they felt the British monarch was violating their right to private property by forcing them to pay taxes they hadn't consented to. That same year, Scottish economic theorist Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations, a book that outlined the principles of an economic system that was taking shape around the institution of private property. Smith argued that by giving people freedom to produce and exchange goods as they pleased, and opening the exchange of goods to domestic and foreign competition, people's natural self interest would promote greater prosperity than with strict government regulations. While Adam Smith referred to the system as a commercial society, he was essentially articulating the beginning of a new economy called capitalism.
Woohoo!
Capitalism
Capitalism.
refers to an economic and political system in which resources are controlled by private owners and sold for a profit on the market. Under capitalism, production and distribution follow the laws of the free market, in which each individual has a basic right to private property in their labor and receives wages in return for their work. Capitalism was in its early stages during the 18th century when the United States was founded, but gained full force during the Industrial Revolution with the rise of factories. As capitalism spread during the Industrial Revolution, it generated both praise and criticism. Karl Marx was a German economic and political theorist who became a famous critic of capitalism. In industrial cities across Western Europe, Marx observed acute human suffering in the midst of great wealth. Workers were packed in factories where they spent 12 hours a day toiling without breaks and for low wages, often losing limbs and mobility due to dangerous conditions on the factory floor. It wasn't only men who worked under perilous circumstances. Women and children under 10 also participated in industrial labor. And after their grueling days, working families went home to tiny apartments in poorly maintained buildings crammed with other workers. Their wages barely kept up with the cost of living. And Marx noted how year after year, workers appeared more worn down, while factory owners and investors amassed ever greater profits. Marx blamed capitalism for this inequality. While he admired the great wealth capitalism was able to generate, he criticized how unevenly it distributed this wealth and the misery it created for workers. Marx's critique of capitalism stemmed from his view of the human condition. Marx identified work as the central feature of human existence. The thing that distinguishes our species from other animal species, Marx believed, is labor, the fact that we create things with our minds and bodies. Human beings are intrinsically driven to produce, but we don't produce in isolation. At its core, human production is social. When we work, we expend our life energy towards social goals, things that have value not just for ourselves, but for others. The economy organizes our work and shapes the social relationships in which we work. Hunter gatherer economies organize work differently from agricultural economies, and agricultural economies organize work differently from industrial economies. The social relationships involved in production and distribution also depend on economy. In a feudal society, workers have different relationships with one another and different relationships with land and resources than they do in a capitalist society. In this module, we'll think through the centrality of work in our lives and the ways the work we do and how that work is valued shape our experience of gender. That's it for the first lecture in Module 5. Welcome back to. In this lecture, I'll address the question, how does capitalism shape both the gender division of labor and gender inequality? The 19th century German political and economic theorist Karl Marx, who I introduced in the last lecture, argued that every economic system organizes labor differently. Marx understood history as the progression from one economic system to another. According to Marx, the social inequality at the heart of capitalism is the result of class conflict. Owners have power over working conditions and wages, and they exploit workers to gain a profit. You may have heard the word class before. In the United States, we often talk about class in terms of people's socioeconomic status. We might describe someone as being upper class, middle class, or lower class, labels that map onto two key socioeconomic factors: a person's income, in other words, how much money they make, and a person's consumption patterns, like the quality and amount of groceries they can buy, the education they can afford for their children, the size, location, and comfort of their housing, how often they eat at restaurants or take vacations, the kind of car or cell phone they have, or whether they receive Section 8 vouchers to help pay for housing or qualify for student financial aid. For Karl Marx, a person's income and consumption patterns stem from their position in the economy, which forms the basis of his understanding of class. Marx's writings describe two main class positions within an economic system: those who own the means of production, like the factories, warehouses, raw materials, robots, and machines needed to produce resources, and those who work the means of production and depend on a wage to survive. Marx refers to the owning class in a capitalist economy as the capitalist class, as well as with the French term bourgeoisie. A person belongs to the capitalist class if they don't rely on their labor to make a living. Jeff Bezos, who you see pictured here, is the founder and former CEO of Amazon, as well as the company's largest shareholder. If Bezos sat in his house for the rest of his days doing absolutely nothing, he would still be able to survive. In fact, he would continue making lots of money through the shares he owns in Amazon and other companies he's invested in. Bezos' wealth doesn't depend on his labor, it depends on other people's labor. The other class under capitalism is the working class, which Marx also refers to with the French term proletariat. The working class encompasses all the people in a society who rely on their labor to survive. People in the working class may own personal property in the things they use, such as clothes, books, phones, cars, and even houses, but they're not deriving income from the things they own. In other words, working class people don't own significant shares of productive property, property that generates a profit. The goal of capitalism, the reason people own and invest in the means of production or productive property, is profit. Profit is the extra value generated when a product or service is sold on the market for more money than was invested in the process that went into producing it. Investors don't put their money into production processes because they want to create jobs or because they believe in the good they're producing. Those things might be added benefits in their minds, but the thing that motivates them, the reason they're setting up a business in the first place, is profit. They want to get more money out of the production process than they put into it. Profit is at the heart of one of Karl Marx's most important insights about the relationship between capitalism and social inequality. According to Marx, most components of the production process are fixed. The cost of raw materials, machines, factories, and warehouses is common to everyone in an industry and can't be tinkered with that much. The most flexible or squishy part of the production process is labor. How much workers are paid for whipping up the raw materials into a finished product or service. Profit, Marx argued, can only come through the exploitation of labor, paying workers less than the value they produce and paying them less than they need to survive. This exploitation defines capitalism and is the conflict at its heart. Workers want to earn more money so they can thrive. Owners want to pay them less so they can profit. Under capitalism, the owning class sets the conditions of working people's lives. It's the business owners who decide how long workers will work and when, how often they take breaks, how much money they'll make, whether they get paid if they're sick or injured, whether they get health insurance, and what kind of health insurance. Ultimately, it's the business owners who decide whether working people even have a job, which, for a person who doesn't own productive property, is the only way to make money and survive in a market economy. As long as working people don't own the means of production,
Woohoo! Woohoo! There you go, Goddess Athena. That's your payment for sticking around a boring stream.
they're dependent on the people who do. Marx believed the only way to end the exploitation of workers and liberate humanity from economic inequality is through the overthrow of capitalism and the establishment of socialism. Socialism is an economic and political system in which society as a whole owns and regulates the means of production, distribution, and exchange. Marx's critique of capitalism and his vision for socialism have been widely influential among activists and intellectuals concerned with economic and social inequality. Socialism transfers the means of production to working people, allowing the working class to democratically run the economy. Marxist thinking has informed the labor movement, which originated in the 19th century. Industrial workers around the world used tactics like work stoppages and strikes to demand improved working conditions and the right to an 8-hour workday. They organized into labor unions to protect and further their rights and interests. Marxist ideas have also influenced the feminist movement. The Industrial Revolution and the consolidation of capitalism changed expectations around gender. Women's role in the domestic sphere of the home grew more pronounced during the 19th century. In industrial Europe and the United States, the home was supposed to be a safe haven from the pressures of the world, a retreat for children and men. It was women's responsibility to take care of the home, to make it comfortable and happy. Western society's identification of masculinity with breadwinning and femininity with caretaking was popularized during the Industrial Revolution. Friedrich Engels, who was a frequent collaborator with Marx, wrote The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, which was published in 1884, the year after Marx's death. In the book, Engels argues that patriarchy and the subordination of women originated with the emergence of private property as a social institution.
I am on YouTube and Twitch right now. So thank you, Miss Sunrise Dawn, for being here.
Before private property, Engels argued, societies had been more egalitarian. Some were even matrilineal. Engels saw monogamy as a source of women's oppression and linked it to the institution of private property. Monogamy refers to the practice of being married to or having sexual relations with one person at a time. Enforcing women's monogamy.
I really hope my teacher talks about polyamory because, it gets such a bad rap. Like, I'm always having to defend myself constantly about polyamory. Oh, also, Goddess Athena. Yeah, she is live. Is she doing GTA?
Enables men to identify their biological children and then pass their wealth onto them. The monogamous woman ensures that accumulated wealth will be passed from father to sons. According to Engels, monogamy is especially important for bourgeois or ruling class women. Monogamous bourgeois women maintain the wealth of bourgeois families from one generation to the next. Alexandra Kollontai was one of the first women to publish in the Marxist tradition. Born in St. Petersburg.
Oh, sorry. I said, oh yeah, GTA. Okay. Oh, about my professor, I said, yeah, I hope she talks about polyamory at all in this. I'm not sure if it will come up, but I get crap all the time about being polyamorous. I understand like the weird need for it back then, but honestly, I don't know. I just feel like more people should just be open and honest and experiment and explore, and it's okay to explore and then all of a sudden not like something and change your mind. We don't have to be one thing our whole lives.
Russia in 1872, Kollontai gained prominence in the Russian Social Democratic Party for her socialist feminist writings. Kollontai linked women's exploitation and oppression to the capitalist economy and believed women's liberation could only come through the struggle for socialism. As a socialist feminist, Kollontai was critical of first wave feminism in Europe and the United States. In a pamphlet called The Social Basis of the Woman Question, Kollontai writes, the feminists seek equality in the framework of the existing class society. In no way do they attack the basis of this society. According to Kollontai, the equality first wave feminists pursued, like the right to vote, own private property, and gain access to the professions, was bourgeois equality. But women, like men, are divided along class lines. Bourgeois women's interests are different from proletarian women's interests. The first text I've assigned this week is another pamphlet Kollontai wrote called Working Woman and Mother. It was written in 1914, 3 years before the Russian Revolution began. Kollontai and other socialists played a leading role in the revolution, which abolished the Russian monarchy and established the Soviet Union. In Working Woman and Mother, Kollontai contrasts the life of a bourgeois woman with that of a proletarian woman. She gives both women the name Masha. She also uses the name Mashenka, which is an affectionate way of saying the name Masha. Both Mashenka, the factory director's wife, and Mashenka, the working woman, are expecting babies, but their experience of pregnancy is vastly different. Do not tire yourself, Mashenka. Do not try and move the armchair, Kollontai writes. That is what they say to Mashenka, the lady. But where have you seen a woman of the working class given special treatment because she's pregnant? Masha and the hundreds of thousands of other women of the propertyless classes who are forced to sell their working hands know that the owners have no mercy when they see women in need, and they have no other alternative, however exhausted they may be, but to go out to work. While motherhood is a joyful occasion for women of the owning class, it's a burden for women of the working class. Childbirth for working class women is risky and even lethal. Childhood for working class children is full of disease and dangers. In describing the difficulties motherhood poses for proletarian women, Kollontai suggests that a woman's position within the capitalist economy shapes her experience of gender. Kollontai argues that capitalism exacerbates the class divide between women of the working class and women of the owning class. She envisions socialism as abolishing class distinctions and treating all women, regardless of the work they do, as citizens. A socialist society strives to take care of people according to their needs. Socialist feminists like Kollontai pay particular attention to the needs of working class women, especially during childbirth and motherhood. Kollontai writes that law and public policy can ensure protections for working mothers and give working class women equal decision-making power over their working conditions. That's it for the second lecture in the Work We Do module. Thanks for your attention. There's one more lecture in this lecture, I'll address the questions: what is care work, and how is unpaid care work connected to gender inequality? The gender division of labor is older than capitalism, and it's older than agriculture. It can be traced back to the earliest hunter-gatherer societies, which tasked men and women with different kinds of work. As human economic systems have changed, so has the gender division of labor and the ends towards which it's organized. Under capitalism, where production and distribution are geared toward maximizing profit for the owning class, the gender division of labor also serves profit. There are two primary ways the gender division of labor operates within capitalism. The first is unpaid work. In capitalist societies, women are expected to perform a significant share of work that's unpaid. This unpaid work is critical for the economy and the profits it generates. The second is occupational segregation. In capitalist societies, women are encouraged to do certain jobs and men are encouraged to do other jobs. Often, the jobs women are encouraged to do are paid less and lead to greater profits for the owners of capital. Let's unpack how capitalism shapes gender inequality as we experience it today. One defining feature of capitalist economies, the thing that distinguishes them from feudal and other economies, is wage labor. Within capitalism, work that creates value is rewarded with wages. Yet, not all work people do in a capitalist economy is paid, even if that work is seen as having a social benefit. For example, most care work is unpaid or unremunerated in capitalist societies. Care work refers to the tasks directly involved in building up people's capabilities and usually involves helping other people meet their bodily needs. It can include cooking, cleaning, washing, dressing, feeding, getting water and firewood, shopping for food, administering medicine and other treatment, providing education, and entertaining. Care work is especially important for those who are dependent, such as children, people who are sick, people with disabilities, and the elderly. Social well being, as well as economic productivity, require care work. Without genuine care and nurturing, children wouldn't develop into high functioning individuals, and adults would have a hard time maintaining and expanding well being and productivity. History and culture have feminized care work, putting pressure on women and girls to perform it as an expression of their gender identity. Part of the reason it's even called care work is that it's supposed to be intrinsically motivated. It's often treated as a spontaneous expression of care and concern for others, which women and girls are expected to convey through their very nature. Some people find that even calling it work is insulting because care is supposed to be a natural expression of femininity, not an economic issue. The second text I've assigned in this module is a short video from the United Nations about unpaid care work. As the video explains, around the world, most of the unpaid care work, about 75%, is done by women and girls. Women spend an average of 4.1 hours a day doing unpaid care and domestic work compared to 1.7 hours for men. The main reason care work is largely unpaid is that patriarchy devalues it. Patriarchy codes feminine qualities and roles as low and inferior. Because women are expected to perform the bulk of unpaid care work, they end up having less time to engage in paid work. The devaluation of care work within capitalist societies promotes occupational segregation. Certain jobs are coded female, meaning society encourages women to pursue them and men to avoid them. These feminized occupations typically pay less than occupations with a predominantly male workforce, even when the jobs require similar skill sets or educations. Sometimes these female coded jobs are called pink collar jobs because they've historically been occupied by women. Women tend to cluster in healthcare, education, and the service industry. And as women's participation in these economic sectors grows, overall wages tend to decline. The concentration of women in low wage sectors contributes to the gender pay gap. Globally, women earn 77 cents for each dollar men earn. At the current rate of progress, the UN estimates it will take 70 years to close the world's gender pay gap. The hyperexploitation of women around the world makes women more likely to be involved in informal economies as well as sex work. Sex work often pays better and is more flexible than other service jobs available to women, especially working class women, women of color, immigrant women, transgender women, and women with disabilities. Campaigns to criminalize sex work have only hurt the most marginalized women and gender non binary people, who are often pushed into sex work because the economy provides them with few viable options. In the United States, gender plays a significant role in shaping economic inequality. Women, especially
Wait,
women of
wait, wait. What
color,
did she
are
say?
more likely to live
I
in
need to back that
poverty
up
in
a
the
little.
United States. Working class women, women of color, immigrant women, transgender
Oh,
women,
okay.
and women with disabilities.
I didn't hear
Campaigns
that
to
full thing. I just
criminalize
wanted to
sex
make
work have only
sure.
hurt the most marginalized women and gender non binary people, who are often pushed into sex work because the economy provides them with few viable options. In the United States, gender plays a significant role in shaping economic inequality. Women, especially women of color, are more likely to live in poverty in the United States than men. Women with disabilities are also more likely to live in poverty than men with disabilities. The Center for American Progress reports that of the 38.1 million people living in poverty in 2018, 56%, or 21.4 million, were women. LGBTQ plus women and trans and gender nonconforming people are also more likely to experience poverty. According to a 2019 survey by the Williams Institute at the UCLA School of Law, 17.9% of lesbian cisgender women, 29.4% of bisexual cisgender women, and 29.4% of transgender people lived in poverty, compared with 17.8% of heterosexual cisgender women and 13.4% of heterosexual cisgender men. The survey found a similarly high poverty rate among gender nonconforming people. We can better understand the overrepresentation of women and LGBTQ plus people among the poor in US society by recalling what we learned in Module 3 when we read Tressie McMillan Cottom's essay, Dying to be Competent. Cottom exposed how when white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism intersect, Black women's pain becomes invisible. These systems steer power and resources toward white, heterosexual, cisgender, and owning class men, and away from non white, queer, trans, non binary, and working class women. An example of the overlapping effects of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism is the gender pay gap. Based on 2022 data, women in the United States earn 82 cents for every dollar men earn. If we look at the pay gap with an intersectional lens, we find that Black women earn only 60 cents, while Latina women earn only 55 cents for every dollar white men earn. Part of the reason for the gender pay gap is the so called motherhood penalty. Our economy punishes women for getting pregnant and having children through decreased earnings. Because women are expected to shoulder most of our society's caregiving, women are more likely than men to take time away from paid work or reduce their paid working hours to engage in unpaid caregiving. The high cost of childcare also pushes many women out of the workforce, particularly women who earn low wages. And even when women don't leave the workforce, they're more likely to seek lower paid positions that offer more flexibility to make it easier to take care of a family. The COVID-19 pandemic placed even more caregiving responsibilities on women. During the pandemic, women left the workforce in greater numbers than men, and many still haven't returned. Another factor influencing the gender pay gap is unconscious bias and discrimination against women, including employers' assumptions that women will leave the workforce to have children, or that women with children should earn less than men because they won't be as productive. A 2017 Pew Research Center survey found that 42% of women in the United States said they've experienced gender discrimination at work, compared to 20% of men. The experience of discrimination at work makes a person more likely to quit and less likely to seek a raise or promotion. Transgender workers are in an even more precarious economic situation. A 2020 study of transgender people in the US found that they're 14 percentage points more likely to live in poverty than cisgender people. Transgender people were also 11 percentage points less likely to have jobs than cisgender men. Discrimination plays a significant role in exposing trans people to heightened economic insecurity. In about half the country, there are no laws prohibiting employment discrimination for trans workers. Even in states where these laws exist, researchers saw little difference, which could be a result of the laws being relatively new. But it's likely there are deeper factors at play, including persistent discrimination and trauma, especially with so many states passing anti trans legislation, which can make transgender people less likely to pursue paid work. Previous research has shown that trans people have higher rates of stress associated illness and disability, and that trans people have a harder time accessing gender inclusive medical care. Health disparities between transgender and cisgender people create another significant barrier to trans individuals' ability to thrive economically. Trans people, especially trans women, are disproportionately vulnerable to housing insecurity due to widespread discrimination against them in the housing.
I do want to say that it is becoming increasingly more harder to be a teacher and being non-binary because of all of the trans hate coming out. And people don't want us to be in those positions or exist really at all. And I get called a PDF file and all that kind of fun jazz. So let's stop doing that.
Housing market. In 2015, 31% of Black transgender women and 27% of Native transgender women reported being denied a home or apartment because they were trans. The Gender Justice League is a Seattle based advocacy organization focused on elevating civil and human
Ooh,
rights for
love them.
trans and gender diverse people. Founded in 2012 by a group of trans, queer, and allied activists, the Gender Justice League centers issues that are often left on the sidelines of traditional LGBTQ activism, such as incarceration and the prison industrial complex, resisting gentrification, homelessness and housing accessibility, reproductive justice, labor rights, and unemployment. The organization provides support to trans and gender diverse people around housing, food, healthcare, and transportation. They also work to increase sustainable employment by educating local businesses about the ways poverty and unemployment impact trans and gender diverse people. I'm super inspired by the ways the Gender Justice League is working at the intersections of gender, race, and class oppression to create a Washington state where all people can live their lives safely, true to themselves, and free from discrimination. You can learn more about the League, including how to get involved as a volunteer, by visiting their website or following them on social media. That's it for the third and final lecture in Module 5, The Work We Do. Thanks for your attention to the lectures this week.
All right, and with that, I think I'm going to sign off as well. I have some sweets in my kitchen that I need to eat, and I need to chill out and go to bed kind of early because I have horror con tomorrow. I get to meet and have a photo op with one of my favorite teen heartthrobs. If you know who Devon Sawa is, I'm gonna, my I bought a photo op for him. Yeah, yeah. I am more lesbian these days, but as soon as I saw that he was on the roster and the guest list, ooh, yep, gonna be there. I might try and stream some of it, but I'm not sure. It might be too chaotic. It might not have a good signal. But I'll definitely take pictures and video and chat about it on Sunday and finish up some studying on Sunday as well. Thank you so much for being here. Love you.